No one in the Hall of Concord looked at humans when the ban was announced. That was the first thing Prefect Speaker Aviantal of the Illyrian Combine remembered years later, when stars were burning and treaties meant less than dust. The great chamber of the Assembly was a bowl of black crystal suspended over the city ocean of Vera, its transparent floor showing a world of stormlight and silver waves beneath. Around the hall rose the thrones and envoys' rings of 87 civilizations, every seat marked by banners of species, imperies, federations, hive consensus blocks, and mercantile leagues. The old powers occupied the inner circles nearest the speaker's dais. The new ones, less tested, less feared, less important, were placed along the outer galleries where the acoustics were poorer and the cameras seldom lingered. Humanity sat in the fourth outer ring, not because they were weak, not officially. Officially, the Terran delegation had been granted its assigned place according to demographic and economic weighting. Everyone in the chamber understood what that phrase really meant. Humanity was tolerated, not trusted, admired in trivial things, not respected in serious ones. Their music sold well in 6 arms of the galaxy. Their biological engineering was elegant. Their freight networks were annoyingly efficient. Their diplomats were polite to the point of offensiveness. But war was the province of elder species, or so Aviantal had believed. The speaker's voice rolled through the chamber in harmonic translation, turning one statement into 87 languages at once, by consent of the core signatories, and in light of the devastation inflicted during the Karad secession fires. The Assembly ratifies Article 19 of the Peace Mantle. No emerging civilization admitted after the Concord reforms shall construct, field, or commission independent line-breaking capital warships, defensive patrol vessels, customs, corvettes, rescue platforms, and anti-piracy escorts remain permissible under tonnage restrictions. Strategic naval force projection is hereby limited to recognized guarantor states. There was a pulse of ceremonial light above the day. The law had passed. A low rustle moved through the chamber, antennae lifting, membranes vibrating, ceremonial plumes dipping in satisfaction. Aviantal touched his translator bead and felt the text stream across his retinal field. The wording was clean, elegant, fatal. It was exactly the kind of law elder powers loved. Moral in language, predatory in architecture. The guarantor states naturally were already armed. The vast dominion with its moon-cracking sea-jarks, the serene hegemony with its gravitic lances. The Illyrian combined his own people with the old fleet. Treaties that effectively gave them legal supremacy over 7 trade corridors and 3 gate nexuses. And the humans, they had joined the Assembly 12 years earlier. Their petition for strategic parity had been delayed, rerouted, reviewed, and buried under commissions. Now the answer had arrived, wrapped in the soft language of peace. No one looked at them. That was the second thing Aviantal remembered. Not even he did. Not at first. He was too busy watching Lord Militant Serac of the vast dominion spread his scaled hands in victory across his armored chair. Serac's crest spines were lit with satisfaction, a private display he had forgotten to suppress. Across the chamber, the serene delegates remained outwardly composed, but their gaze flickered toward one another with unmistakable relief. A dozen smaller states visibly relaxed. The law meant stability, they would say. It meant fewer arms races, fewer reckless newcomers, fewer chances for disorder. It meant the old order had just nailed its own chains into place. Then, at last, Aviantal looked toward the Terran ring. The human ambassador was standing. She had risen without fanfare, a single dark figure in a slate uniform amid the silver desks of the outer tier. No one had granted her the floor. By custom, she should have requested recognition and waited. Instead, she simply stood, hands resting on the polished rail before her, expression unreadable. Ambassador Elarabos. Avental knew her by reputation before he ever knew her by voice. Most did. Humans were too physically fragile for many species' instincts to read them as dangerous. They lacked natural armor, obvious venom, visible threat displays, yet this one possessed the unnerving stillness of a predator who did not need to prove she was armed. The chamber's ambient murmur thinned. Speaker Helan, who despised breaches of protocol almost as much as he despised humans, inclined his vast translucent head a fraction. The Terran representative will sit. Vos did not sit. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the hall had to hush to hear it. You have mistaken restraint for dependence. Avental felt an involuntary ripple move through his secondary hearts. The speaker's crest clouded in irritation. Ambassador, the article has passed. You may submit a formal objection through you mistake courtesy for compliance, Voss said. Now all eyes were on her. Even Sarak leaned forward. The translator carried her words perfectly, but there was something in the original human cadence that the machine could not flatten a controlled heat, like pressure trapped behind steel. For 12 years, she said, Earth accepted delay. Review, audit, inspection. We opened our shipyards, our ports, our research campuses. We signed every non-proliferation pledge placed before us. We submitted tonnage reports, hull registries, antimatter inventory tallies, reactor audits, weapon lattice, disclosures, command doctrine, summaries, and civilian oversight certifications. We did these things because we were told that transparency would earn trust. She let her gaze travel slowly across the inner rings. Today you have informed us that trust was never the price of admission. Submission was. The chamber darkened a shade as the hall's sensory web detected rising tension. Security drones, no larger than a human skull, detached from their alcoves high above the galleries and drifted into standby positions near the dais. Avental should have been offended. He should have dismissed the outburst as the wounded theatrics of a lesser state-denied parity. Instead, he found himself listening with an attention so sharp it bordered on fear, because her tone was wrong, not desperate, not angry in the ordinary way, measured, like someone noting the exact moment a bridge cable snaps. Lord Militant Sarek gave a low, contemptuous hiss. The Terran Union should be grateful. This law protects younger civilizations from their own immaturity. You are merchants, biocrafters. You are not line fleet people. A few delegates signaled polite agreement. Voss turned her head toward the Vask warlord, and for the first time a smile touched her face. It was not a pleasant smile. Line fleet people, she repeated. An interesting phrase. Tell me, Lord Militant, how many generations did it take your species to become wise enough to wage war? The Vask crest flared crimson. Take care. Mamo? No, Voss said softly. You take care. The speaker rose, voice booming now with amplified authority. This exchange is concluded. The Terran delegation will observe decorum or be removed from the chamber. At that, every human in the outer ring stood. Not many only, 7 of them, but the motion was so perfectly synchronized that the hall seemed to flinch. Advisors, attaches, interpreters, aides. They rose as one, each dressed in the same dark slate formal uniform, each expression carved from the same impassive stone. Aviental became acutely aware of how little he knew about human military custom. Had he ever seen their officers outside diplomatic receptions? Had anyone? Humanity had no legal war fleet, after all. They maintained rescue flotillas, convoy escorts, colonial patrol vessels, anti-radar cutter wings. They excelled in logistics and disaster response. Their public doctrine emphasized civilian authority, de-escalation, mutual aid, interoperable infrastructure. They were admired for arriving first after catastrophes and last to leave. Even their ships looked harmless. Rounded hulls, broad medical bays, modular freight spines, too much white paint, too many docking ports, too many heat sinks, if one cared to notice. Voss drew a data wafer from inside her sleeve and placed it on the rail. Terran Union submits a final notice to the Assembly record. Speaker Helan did not gesture for it to be received. The wafer activated. Anyway, projecting a column of hard blue text over the center of the chamber. Unauthorized. Illegal. Impossible. Aviental's translator raced to keep up. Notice of Sovereign Security Interpretation filed by the Terran Union, effective upon ratification of Article 19. Whispers broke out across the galleries. Sarok barked. "What is this?" Voss answered, without looking at him. "Your law forbids human warships." Her eyes lifted to the speaker, then to the ring of guarantor states. "You should have been more specific." The projection shifted. New schematics bloomed above the chamber. At first, Aviental did not understand what he was seeing. Neither, apparently, did most of the assembly. The diagrams were of familiar human-civilian vessels, freight haulers, colony barges, hospital carriers, mobile foundries, ice harvesters, relief transports, orbital tugs. Hundreds of classes, thousands of hull IDs, all tagged with registry data the assembly itself had audited and approved. Then overlays ignited across them in scarlet. Internal reinforcement trusses hidden inside cargo spines, mass reactive bulkheads embedded in medical decks, distributed reactor clusters routed through life support redundancies, docking collars that unfolded into weapons pylons, heat dispersal vanes shaped less like civilian cooling networks and more like spinal gun channels waiting for installation. Aviental's blood ran cold. Not ships, he realized. Infrastructure. An entire civilization's worth of harmless infrastructure, built to become something else. The speaker thundered for order, but the chamber was already losing it. Delegates were standing, shouting, transmitting emergency packets. Sarek's escort guards had surged to the front of his dais. Even the serene masks of the hegemony cracked. Voss's voice cut through the chaos. "You barred us from building warships," she said, "so we built everything except warships." The chamber fell still in pieces. Aviental stared upward as the projection changed again. This time, not into schematics, but live telemetry. He recognized one of the transponders at once. A Terran hospital convoy near the Karth Meridian. Another from a grain arc beyond the Helios Gate. Another from a disaster response flotilla inside vast frontier space. One by one, their designations flashed and rewrote themselves under emergency sovereign codes. Civilian relief platform became auxiliary strategic node. Bulk transport became modular siege tender. Deep-range rescue carrier became expeditionary command hull. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, all across assembly space. Aviental's hand clenched so hard on his desk rail that one of his finger joints clicked out of alignment. He did not feel it. He only heard Ambassador Alara Voss deliver the sentence that would split an age in two. "By your own law," she said, "humanity possesses no warships." She paused. Outside the crystal floor of the chamber, lightning crossed the ocean world below like cracks in a mirror. Only a navy. And at that exact moment, every light in the Hall of Concord went out. The lights did not fail. That was the first thing Prefect Speaker Avental realized once his eyes adjusted to the sudden darkness. Nothing in the Hall of Concord truly failed. The chamber was built by civilizations that had survived asteroid winters, stellar flurries, and planetary wars. Its systems were redundant beyond reason. If one grid died, another awoke. If power collapsed, crystal matrices harvested energy from the planet's magnetic tides below. No, the lights had been turned off. Deliberately. For 3 seconds, the assembly sat in darkness. Then the emergency illumination ignited thin blue bands along the edges of the dais and the great circular tiers. The chamber appeared suddenly colder, harsher, stripped of its ceremonial warmth. Faces and carapaces and sensory plumes gleamed in stark light. Security drones swarmed from the ceiling like startled insects. Speaker Halland's voice roared across the chamber. "Terran delegation splendis interference." But the humans had not moved. Ambassador Laravos still stood exactly where she had been, hands resting lightly on the rail. The other 6 humans behind her stood in the same rigid stillness, eyes forward. It looked less like a diplomatic posture and more like a military formation. Avantal's translators whispered incoming signals into his cognition bead. Data traffic had exploded across the assembly networks. Emergency queries, military alerts, economic channel requests, civilian transit recalls, hundreds of messages per second, escalating rapidly. The telemetry projection above the hall was still running. And it was changing. The Terran registries were updating in real time across the spiral arms of assembly space. The transponders of thousands of vessels were rewriting their classifications. Freight, convoys, relief carriers, agricultural transport swarms, mobile shipyards, atmospheric processors, each one silently transitioning from civilian registry to sovereign auxiliary command authority. The legal language scrolled beside the icons. Article 19 prohibited warships, but nowhere did it prohibit a civilian vessel from carrying modular defensive infrastructure if that vessel served a humanitarian function. The loophole was breathtaking. Serac was the first to understand. The Vosk warlord surged to his feet, crest flaring bright crimson. "You deceptive mammals!" His voice echoed through the chamber like a weapon discharge. "You constructed a hidden fleet under civilian protection." Voss did not look at him. "No," she said calmly. "We constructed a civilization." The difference landed like a gravitational shock. Aviantal's mind raced as he studied the projections. The scale was staggering. Terran Industrial Networks had spent 12 years quietly designing every transport, station, and orbital hub to accept military conversion modules. Cargo rails became missile magazines. Docking spines became fighter launch tracks. Thermal management systems previously explained as necessary for hospital-grade sterilization were perfectly aligned for heavy particle cannon cooling. Every ship was harmless until it wasn't. The assembly had inspected those vessels dozens of times. They had found exactly what they were told they would find: civilian systems. Because the weapons themselves had never been installed. Only the spaces where weapons would go. A civilization-wide blueprint waiting for activation. Speaker Halen struck the dais with a resonant hammer. "This chamber will restore order." But Order was dissolving rapidly. Across the inner rings, Guarantor states were already consulting with their escorts. Sarek's guards had formed a tight wedge around the Vascadeus. Serene hegemony envoys were whispering urgently through bioluminescent tendrils. Aviantal opened a private diplomatic channel to the Combine Strategic Directorate. The reply arrived instantly. Priority alert. Human network activity detected across 312 systems. He felt his secondary hearts tighten. 312. That was not a fleet. That was infrastructure dominance. The projection above the hall shifted again. Now it displayed star maps. Assembly space glittered with icon civilian Terran ships scattered across trade routes, orbital construction zones, and disaster relief stations. At first, the pattern looked random. Then the overlays aligned subtly. Chains, jump corridors, fuel depots, data relays, human logistics networks formed a web across the entire political core of the galaxy, a web that had just become a military lattice. Aviantal whispered softly to himself. Stars preserve us, because he understood something most of the assembly had not yet realized. The Terrans had not built their strength outside the system, they had built it inside. Every major trade artery depended on Terran freight scheduling. Every large-scale humanitarian corridor relied on Terran rescue ships. Every frontier colony used Terran infrastructure nodes for power, distribution, and navigation. The assembly had allowed them to become indispensable. Now that infrastructure was activating under sovereign command, the hall erupted again. This is an act of war. Sahaki roared. Voss finally turned toward him. No, she said, this is compliance. The word was delivered like a blade. You passed a law forbidding humanity from building warships. We complied fully. She gestured lightly toward the projection. There are no Terran warships. The telemetry continues scrolling. Thousands of civilian hulls transitioning into auxiliary command networks. Only ships that defend themselves. The Vask warlord's eyes burned. Your deception will not save you when the Dominion fleets arrive. Voss tilted her head slightly. A curious human gesture. I wondered when you would say that. Another projection opened above the chamber. This one was not Terran. It was Vask. Military fleet, telemetry, and it was moving. The Dominion had already launched ships from 3 frontier bases. Aviantal's translator struggled to process the incoming data. Heavy dreadnoughts, heavy planetary assault cruisers, dozens of them. They were accelerating toward Terran trade sectors. Sarek's crest flared triumphantly. You see, he said. Real fleets. The implication hung in the chamber. Civilian tricks would not stand against true warships. Ambassador Voss studied the projection quietly. Then she said something that made Aviantal's blood run cold. They left early. The speaker's crest rippled in confusion. What do you mean? Voss tapped the rail. The star map zoomed outward, and suddenly the assembly saw the larger picture. Terran infrastructure nodes, not scattered. Positioned. They sat at the intersections of jump corridors and gravitational lanes exactly where fleets had to travel to move efficiently through assembly space. And many of those nodes were already active. One of the icons pulsed red. Designation: Helioget Relief Platform. Location: directly along the Vask fleet's fastest approach vector. Sarak frowned. That is a hospital station. Yes, Voss said. The projection zoomed further. Internal schematics unfolded. Cargo decks reconfiguring, docking, arms separating, structural plating. shifting along hidden rails. Something enormous was unfolding from the station's spine. Aviantal stared as the blueprint resolved. A linear accelerator channel, kilometers long, a weapon the size of a city. Impossible, Serac whispered. Voss watched the unfolding transformation with quiet satisfaction. Lord Militant, she said softly, you asked whether humans were line fleet people. The station finished its transformation. Across the galaxy, thousands of other icons began similar metamorphoses. Cargo ships unfolding armored ribs, rescue carriers opening launch bays, agricultural barges extending mass-driver arrays, an entire civilian civilization becoming something else, a navy that had never technically existed. Voss looked back at the vast warlord and delivered the sentence that would echo across history. Humanity does not build warships. She paused. We build solutions. Then a new alert flashed across the chamber. The first Vask dreadnought had entered Heliogate approach. The Terran station fired, and the entire assembly watched in stunned silence as a weapon disguised as a hospital facility split a battleship in half. The chamber fell utterly still. Serac's crest slowly lowered, because the telemetry showed something even worse. The Terran network had only begun activating. Across the spiral arms of civilized space, thousands more civilian ships were waking up, and they were all perfectly positioned. Ambassador Voss folded her hands calmly. This is the moment, she said quietly, when you realize humanity spent 12 years preparing for a war we hoped you would never start. She looked across the chamber at 87 civilizations, and none of them knew yet how much further the Terrans had gone. Then the star map zoomed out again, far beyond assembly space, and a new signal appeared. Unknown. Massive. Approaching. Aviantal felt something ancient stir in his instincts. Fear, because the telemetry labeled it with a Terran command prefix. Project Sentinel active, and no one in the assembly had ever heard of it. The assembly had seen war before. Most of the elder species present in the Hall of Concord had risen from history soaked in its planetary sieges, orbital bombardments, stellar blockades. Entire civilizations had been shaped by the mathematics of fleet warfare. But this was different. Prefect speaker. Aviantal watched the tactical projection above the chamber with the terrible clarity of someone witnessing a law of physics breaking. The first Vask dreadnought had not merely been damaged, it had ceased to exist. One moment it had been a titan of alloy and reactor fighter vessel, 3 kilometers long, with armor thick enough to shrug off nuclear impacts. The next moment the Heliogate relief platform had fired, and the dreadnought had been cut apart, as if space itself had decided the ship no longer belonged in one piece. The assembly's combat telemetry replayed the event again and again. A focused, relativistic mass driver. Not a beam, not a missile, a solid projectile accelerated to a percentage of light speed through a concealed accelerator track hidden within the station's spine. The shot struck the Vask dreadnought mid-hull. The result was catastrophic. Armor vaporized. Internal decks collapsed in cascading decompression waves. The ship broke in two before its reactors even understood they had been hit. Serac stood frozen. His crest spine slowly dimmed from crimson to a pale, shocked gray. That station was inspected, he whispered. Ambassador Ilarovos nodded once. Of course it was. Her voice remained maddeningly calm. You verified the hospital wards, the emergency biolabs, the medical cryost, the relief fabrication modules. She gestured toward the projection. "You never asked how we moved planetary-scale cargo without heavy internal rail systems." A murmur rippled through the assembly, because every logistics expert in the chamber suddenly realized the same thing. Human cargo ships had always used linear transfer rails to move massive freight containers through their hulls. Those rails were structurally identical to the accelerator channels used in mass drivers. The chamber's lights flickered again, not from sabotage, but from the tidal surge of data traffic now overwhelming the diplomatic networks. Across the star map, new alerts were appearing. Terran infrastructure nodes activating everywhere. Civilian traffic converting to military coordination channels. Docking arrays unfolding into weapon racks. Modular armor plates locking into place over hull sections, once labeled cargo insulation. It was happening so quickly the assembly could barely track it. 12 years of preparation was unfolding in minutes. Aviantal leaned forward in stunned silence. The scale of it was staggering. Every Terran shipyard, every orbital freight hub, every disaster response convoy, every mobile factory, all of it had been designed to convert into combat capability the moment sovereignty demanded it. Not a fleet, a distributed war machine woven into the economic fabric of half the galaxy, and the assembly itself had approved the permits. Serac slammed one clawed fist against his dais. "This changes nothing." His voice cracked like thunder. "The Dominion fleet still stands." That tactica projection responded immediately. The Vask fleet at Heliogate had been advancing in tight formation. 30 capital warships, supported by escort cruisers and interceptor wings. Now the formation was breaking apart because the Terran hospital station had not fired once. It had fired again. Another mass driver round streaked across the map. Another dreadnought vanished. The Vask formation scattered. For the first time in centuries, a Dominion fleet was retreating from a single stationary target. The chamber erupted in stunned shouting. "They're outranged. That weapon shouldn't exist on a civilian platform. Why were we not informed of this technology?" Aviantal barely heard them. He was watching the Terran network expand. More icons were activating. Cargo convoys near the Serene Trade Corridor, mining platforms along the Larkspur Belt, agricultural transports in the neutral frontier, each one quietly transforming, and with every activation, the tactical web of Terran presence tightened across assembly space. Not aggressive, not invading, just positioned, as if humanity had spent 12 years asking one question: where would a war matter most? And then placing ships there. Speaker Halen finally found his voice again. This assembly did not authorize military action. Voss met his gaze calmly. "Correct. You are violating assembly law." "No," she said. "We are obeying it precisely." Her eyes flicked toward the projection where the legal text of Article 19 still glowed faintly. "No warships." She spread her hands slightly. "Show me one!" The chamber fell silent again, because technically there were none. Not a single Terran vessel in the registry was classified as a warship. They were cargo carriers, medical platforms, industrial support vessels, exploration ships. The Assembly's own legal structure had ensured that distinction, and now it could not be undone without admitting catastrophic failure. Serac snarled, "This legal trickery will not save you." The warlord's gaze burned toward the star map. "Dominion fleets will purge your infrastructure system by system." Boss considered that. "Yes," she said quietly, "you could try." Her finger tapped the rail again. The star map shifted outward, and suddenly the assembly saw something new. Beyond the network of Terran civilian vessels, beyond the trade corridors, beyond the frontier colonies, a single signal Project Sentinel. It hovered far outside assembly space, near the dark boundary where known civilization faded into unexplored stars. Mass readings scrolled beside the icon. The chamber fell silent, because the numbers made no sense. Energy output greater than a fleet reactor cluster. Mass signature larger than a station complex. Velocity approaching the limits of long-range detection. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a station. It was something else. Speaker Halan's voice lowered. "Ambassador, what is that?" Vos looked at the projection for the first time since the confrontation began. She hesitated, not out of fear, but something else. Something heavier. "We hoped you would never see it." Avantel felt a chill ripple through his secondary hearts. Sarek laughed harshly. "Another bluff." Vos shook her head. "No." She turned to face the chamber fully now. "Humanity joined the Assembly 12 years ago because we believed your system could prevent war." Her voice carried differently now. Not defiant, not diplomatic, almost sorrowful. "But we are a species shaped by a brutal past." Images flickered briefly across the projection. Ancient human battlefields, ruined cities, planetary wars from their early history. "We learned something during those centuries." She looked back at the distant signal labeled Project Sentinel. "If peace depends on other powers choosing restraint, then peace is fragile." The unknown object pulsed again, its mass reading updated. Higher, much higher. The Assembly's senses were finally resolving its structure, and the image forming on the projection made several delegates recoil in instinctive horror, because it was enormous, a structure kilometers across, layered with armor rings and reactor cores, a weapon platform large enough to challenge entire fleets. Sarek's laughter faded. "What is that?" Vos answered quietly. "A contingency." Avantos' translator struggled to process the incoming telemetry because the object was accelerating straight toward assembly space. The chamber's strategic systems began calculating projections. Arrival time, combat potential, energy output. Every number came back with the same conclusion. If that structure was armed, it could dominate entire sectors alone. Sarak's voice turned cautious. "You built this during the treaty era?" "Yes, without informing the Assembly." Vos looked at him steadily. "You banned our warships." The implication hung in the air, but the next words changed everything. "We didn't say we wouldn't build something else." The projection zoomed closer to the approaching structure. More details emerged. Massive docking rings, launch rays, internal shipyard bays, and something even stranger. Thousands of smaller Terran civilian vessels were already converging toward it. Cargo ships, relief platforms, mining transports. They were docking, integrating, connecting to the structure-light cells, joining a living organism. Avantal's breath caught, because he suddenly understood the civilian fleet wasn't separate. It was part of the weapon. Project Sentinel wasn't just a ship. It was the core of a system, a modular war construct capable of absorbing entire logistics networks and turning them into military infrastructure, an expandable fortress, a fleet factory, a strategic command platform. All at once, and it was coming, slowly, inevitably, toward the heart of assembly civilization. Voss folded her hands behind her back. When you forbade humanities from building warships, she let the silence stretch. You forced us to think bigger. The chamber's sensor suddenly screamed with a new alert. Another fleet had entered the map. Not Vask, not Terran, unknown transponders. Hundreds of them. Emerging from deep space near the Sentinel vector, Aviantal stared in shock. Because these ships were not human, and they were heading directly toward the incoming superstructure, the Assembly's translation systems attempted to decode their signals. The results flashed across the chamber in red: hostile extragalactic contact, unknown civilization. Voss's expression darkened. Because she recognized the signatures immediately. She whispered one word. Too early. The alien fleet accelerated straight toward Project Sentinel, and the galaxy's first true war was about to begin. For a long moment after the alert appeared, the Hall of Concord did not erupt into panic. It simply froze. Prefect Speaker? Aviantal would later remember that silence more clearly than anything else, the terrible stillness of 87 civilizations, realizing that the rules they had argued over 4 decades no longer mattered. The tactical projection hovered above the chamber like a wound in space. 2 forces now dominated the map: Project Sentinel, humanity's impossible construct, advancing toward Assembly territory, and the unknown fleet, hundreds of alien vessels, emerging from deep space along its vector. Every strategic sensor in the Assembly network was now focused on them. Data flooded the chamber. The unknown ships were unlike anything cataloged in the galactic archives. Their hulls were asymmetrical, organic in structure, yet metallic in composition. Energy readings suggested propulsion systems that did not conform to any known drive model. Their formations were loose but deliberate, like predators circling prey rather than fleets marching to war. The Assembly translation systems struggled to interpret their transmissions. Finally, a signal resolved. A single phrase appeared in the center of the projection. Harvest cycle resumed. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Sarek broke the silence first. Ambassador, the Vask warlord said slowly, you will explain this. Elara Voss had not moved since the alert appeared. Her eyes remained fixed on the unknown fleet. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet gravity of someone admitting a truth long hidden. They found us sooner than expected. Aviantal felt his secondary heart stutter. You knew about them, he said. It wasn't a question. Voss nodded once. Yes? The chamber erupted. You concealed hostile alien contact from the Assembly. This is a violation of every interstellar treaty. Your secrecy has endangered the entire Concord. Speaker Helen slammed the resonance hammer again and again until the chamber quieted. You will explain yourself immediately. Voss exhaled slowly. Then she turned to face the hall. This story begins before humanity joined the Assembly, she said. The projection shifted. The star map zoomed outward far beyond the boundaries of known civilization, past the outer colonies, past the last exploration beacons humanity had ever publicly acknowledged, and there, deep in the dark between galaxies, a faint cluster of sensor echoes appeared. Ancient, massive. 22 years ago, Voss said, a Terran deep range survey vessel detected anomalous energy signatures beyond the Perseus Gap. Images flickered across the project, a small exploration ship drifting near the edge of mapped space. Its sensors recording impossible readings, mass signatures larger than fleets, radiation patterns inconsistent with natural stellar phenomena. At first we believed it was a natural structure, she continued, until we realized the signatures were moving. the projection resolved into something horrific. Thousands of massive constructs drifting through intergalactic darkness, planet-scale machines, harvesting systems, extraction arrays, civilizations, or what had once been civilizations. Aviental felt his breath leave him. Because the images showed ruined worlds, entire star systems stripped of planets, stellar matters siphoned away into colossal industrial constructs. "Who are they?" Speaker Halen whispered. Voss answered with a single word. "We call them the Hollows." The name lingered in the chamber like a chill wind. "They are not a civilization in the way we understand the term," she said. "They are a migration." The projection showed their trajectory, a slow arc across intergalactic space, moving from galaxy to galaxy across cosmic time, consuming, harvesting, advancing. "They arrive every few million years," Voss said quietly. "They dismantle the technological civilizations they encounter." The chamber grew colder, and then they move on. Serac leaned forward slowly. "You discovered this 22 years ago." "Yes." "And you told no one?" "No," Voss said, "because we needed time." The projection shifted again. Human shipyards, orbital construction rings, freight fleets expanding across the spiral arms. "Humanity realized something immediately," she continued. "If the Hollows reached our galaxy, none of us would survive." The assembly delegates stared at the projections in stunned silence, because the scale of the alien migration was incomprehensible. The Hollows were not a fleet. They were an ecosystem of machines, billions of autonomous constructs harvesting entire solar systems. A galactic extinction event. "And so," Voss said softly, "we began preparing." Aviental felt his mind racing. The last 12 years suddenly made horrifying sense. Humanity had not spent that time quietly integrating into the assembly. They had been building, expanding logistics networks, developing modular infrastructure, positioning civilian fleets across strategic corridors. Not for conquest, for survival. "Project Sentinel," Voss said, gesturing toward the approaching construct on the map, "is the core of that preparation." The projection zoomed closer to the massive structure. Now the assembly could see its true scale. A mobile fortress, a shipyard, a strategic command nexus capable of coordinating thousands of vessels simultaneously. "Sentinel is not a warship," she continued. "It is a mobilization platform. Docking arrays unfolded along its surface. Terran cargo vessels were merging with it continuously, feeding raw materials into massive internal factories. Everything humanity has built in the last decade was designed to plug into this." Aviental felt a quiet dread settle over him, because he finally understood why the Terrans had never protested the ban on warships. They had been building something far more dangerous, a civilization capable of converting its entire economic infrastructure into a war machine. Serac's voice was low. "You expected these creatures to arrive?" "Yes." "And you believed you could fight them?" "No." The honesty stunned the chamber. Voss met Serac's gaze. "We believed we might delay them." She turned toward the unknown fleet approaching Sentinel. "But we thought we had more time." The alien ships were accelerating now, their formations tightening as they approached the massive Terran construct. New signals appeared on the tactical projection. Energy spikes, weapon signatures, and something worse. Replication nodes. The Hollows were deploying harvesting drones. Thousands of them. Aviental felt a deep, instinctive terror rise within him. This was not war. This was predation. Speaker Halen whispered hoarsely. "How long until they reach assembly space?" The tactical system answered. 7 months. The chamber descended into chaos. That is not enough time to mobilize. Our fleets cannot face something of this magnitude. We must evacuate the core worlds. Through it all, Voss remained still. Then she spoke again. "There is another reason humanity kept this secret." The chamber quieted slowly. She turned back to the projection. To fight the Hollows, we had to design weapons capable of destroying machines the size of moons. The projection zoomed further into Project Sentinel. Internal weapons systems unfolded across disk Gravichiki, Lancis, relativistic artillery, stellar-scale energy collectors, weapons so large they bordered on theoretical physics. Avientao felt a cold realization settle into his bones. If humanity possessed technology capable of fighting the Hollows, then they possessed technology capable of destroying the assembly. The chamber understood it at the same moment. Sarak's voice was barely a whisper. "You built a weapon that could annihilate us." Voss did not deny it. Yes, silence fell. "But we didn't build it for you," she said quietly. Another alert flashed across the tactical map. The Hollow fleet had opened fire. Dark energy lances struck the outer defensive arrays of Project Sentinel. The massive construct shuddered. Terran cargo ships scrambled away from the impact zone. Emergency shields flared across its surface. Aviental stared at the unfolding battle. The first clash between humanity and the Hollows had begun, and the galaxy was not ready for it. Voss turned toward the assembly one final time. "We hoped," she said softly, "that if the day ever came when we needed to activate Sentinel, we would not have to do it alone." She looked across the chamber at 87 civilizations that had just tried to limit humanity's military power. The irony was almost unbearable. Outside the assembly hall, lightning crossed the oceans of Vera again. Inside, the tactical projection showed the impossible. Project Sentinel firing its first weapon. A beam of gravitational energy lanced into the approaching Hollow fleet. One of the alien harvesters shattered, but dozens more kept coming, and for the first time in millions of years, the Hollows had encountered a civilization that fought back. But even Voss did not know yet whether humanity's greatest secret would save the galaxy or doom it. The first shot from Project Sentinel did not look like a weapon, at least not at first. In the Hall of Concord, the tactical projection showed only a distortional ripple in the starfield surrounding the massive Terran structure. The fabric of space seemed to bend inward along a single axis, like gravity itself had been grasped and pulled taut. Then the ripple snapped forward. A beam of compressed space-time streaked across the void. It struck the nearest Hollow harvester, and the impossible happened. The alien machine, an object nearly the size of a small moon, armored in layers of unknown composite, did not explode. It collapsed. Its structure folded inward violently, crushed by gravitational forces that spiked to catastrophic levels inside its hull. Entire segments imploded into singularity-like compression points before tearing themselves apart. The harvester disintegrated into a storm of molten fragments. For the first time since entering the galaxy, the Hollows had lost something. The Hall of Concord was silent. Every species present had spent centuries studying war. None of them had ever seen a weapon like that. Prefect Speaker of Antal felt a slow chill move through his body as he studied the telemetry. The gravitational lance had required enormous power. The energy readings from Sentinel's reactors were still climbing back toward equilibrium. Even humanity's greatest construct could not fire such a weapon rapidly, and the Hollow fleet contained hundreds of harvesters The alien formation reacted immediately. New drones launched from the approaching vessel's sleek black shapes that swarmed outward like a cloud of metallic insects. The tactical projection magnified them, self-replicating attack constructs. Thousands, then tens of thousands. They accelerated toward Sentinel. Aviental whispered quietly, "They're adapting already." Ambassador Elera Voss nodded. "They always do." Another hollow harvester opened fire. This weapon was different. A lattice of dark energy arced outward, striking Sentinel's forward shield array. The Terran construct shuddered violently as defensive fields struggled to absorb the impact. Shield integrity dropped by 11%. The assembly's strategic systems displayed the damage in cold numbers. If the hollows concentrated fire, even Sentinel might fall. Serac leaned forward slowly. The Vask warlord no longer looked triumphant. "You built this to stop them." "Yes. And you still think it might not be enough?" Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched the projection as Terran cargo ships detached from Sentinel's docking rings and maneuvered into defensive formations. Avento studied the ships carefully. They were not elegant war vessels. They were freighters, industrial platforms, mining barges, ships built to move cargo across the stars, and yet each one was unfolding weapon systems along its hull. Mass drivers, missile racks, pointy fence, arrays, thousands of civilian ships becoming a defensive fleet. It was clumsy, improvised, but terrifying in scale. The swarm of holodrones struck them seconds later. The battle changed instantly. The projection erupted into a storm of icons as Terran ships began firing. Freighters launched missiles in enormous salvos. Mining platforms unleashed particle beams designed for asteroid cutting. Agricultural transports deployed defensive drone clouds meant for crop protection against micrometeorites. The weapons were not optimized for war, but there were thousands of them. Holodrones began to fall. Dozens at first, then hundreds. But for every one destroyed, two more seemed to appear. Aviental stared at the projections with growing dread. "They're replicating." "Yes," Voss said quietly. "They harvest matter from their surroundings to build more drones." The projection zoomed closer to the battle. Destroyed ships, fragments of metal, even asteroid debris from the surrounding region. The drones were consuming it, rebuilding themselves in real time. A perfect machine ecology. Sentinel fired again. Another gravitational lance tore through the alien formation, destroying two harvesters in a single devastating strike. But the hollows adjusted immediately. Their fleet began spreading outward, forcing Sentinel to divide its fire. Aviental's strategic instincts screamed the same conclusion that Terrans already understood. The hollows did not need to win quickly. They only needed to overwhelm. And their numbers were almost endless. Inside the Hall of Concord, the atmosphere had changed. The assembly was no longer arguing. They were watching. Watching a war humanity had been preparing for in silence. Watching the species they had dismissed as naive merchants, now holding the line against something ancient and monstrous. Speaker Halen turned slowly toward Voss. "If Sentinel falls," Voss finished the sentence for him, "they reach the galaxy, and then they begin harvesting." Aviental looked at the map of known civilization. Hundreds of inhabited systems, trillions of lives. He imagined the hollows spreading across it like fire, one world after another, stripped down to raw materials, a cold extinction. And suddenly the assembly understood something profound. Humanity had not built Project Sentinel as a weapon. They had built it as a shield. Serac rose slowly from his seat. The Vaska warlord looked different now. Not arrogant, not furious, just thoughtful. He turned to the speaker. The Dominion fleet remains operational. Speaker Halen blinked. What are you saying? Serac gestured toward the projection. Those creatures threaten all of us. He turned his gaze toward Voss. You humans prepared to fight them alone. Yes, perhaps that was your mistake. The chamber shifted, because Serac was not speaking as an enemy anymore. He was speaking as a warrior. A warrior recognizing another. The Vask warlord opened a command channel. His voice carried across Dominion military networks. All Vask fleets. He paused, then finished the sentence that would echo across history. Prepare to engage hostile extragalactic forces. The assembly gasped. Voss stared at him. Lord Milliton. Serac gave a grim smile. You are not the only species that remembers war. Across the projection, new icons appeared. Vask, dreadnoughts, Dominion battle carriers, interceptor wings, launching from distant systems. They were turning, heading toward Sentinel. Aviantal felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Hope. Then another voice spoke, soft, measured. The serene hegemony ambassador. The hegemony will contribute our fleets. More icons appeared. Graceful, serene warships emerging from hidden shipyards. Then another voice. Then another. Across the chamber, civilizations began activating military channels. Illyrian defense, flotillas, mercantile league, carrier groups, frontier coalition patrol fleets. The assembly had banned humanity from building warships, but they had never banned themselves. And now every species in the chamber was mobilizing. The projection shifted again. The Hollow Fleet continued advancing, but now a new wave of ships was racing toward the battlefield. Hundreds, then thousands. An entire galaxy waking up. Ambassador Ilara Voss watched the growing fleet icons in silence. For a moment, their weight she had carried for 12 years seemed to lift slightly. She whispered quietly, Maybe. Avental turned toward her. Maybe what? She looked at the projection where Sentinel still fought alone against the alien armada. Maybe we don't have to hold the line alone anymore. But even as she spoke, the tactical system screamed with a new alert. A massive hollow construct emerged from behind the fleet. Something larger than the harvesters. Much larger. A command node. Its energy readings dwarfed everything else on the battlefield. Avental felt his heart stop, because the projections estimated its weapon output. One shot from that machine could destroy Project Sentinel, and it was powering up. Voss stared at the icon in stunned silence, because humanity's contingency plan had never accounted for something that large. Across the galaxy, fleets were still racing toward the battlefield, but they were hours away. Sentinel did not have hours. The command node fired, and the entire galaxy watched as a beam of impossible energy streaked toward humanity's last defense. The beam from the hollow command node crossed the battlefield in less than a second. It was not light, not energy in any form the assembly's sensors could easily define. It looked more like the absence of reality itself, a corridor of collapsing space carving through the void toward Project Sentinel. Prefect speaker. Avental saw the trajectory calculation appear across the tactical display. Impact in 0.84 seconds. There was no time for strategy. No time for diplomacy, only time for decision. Inside the Hall of Concord, every delegate stared upward at the projection as humanity's greatest construct faced destruction. Ambassador Elara Voss did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on the incoming beam. For 12 years, she had lived with the possibility that this moment would come. And now it had. "Sentinel Command," she said quietly into the communicator at her collar. Across the galaxy, her voice reached the massive structure at the edge of the battlefield. A calm reply returned. "Command acknowledges." Aviental heard the voice echo faintly through the chamber. "Speakers. Human. Steady. Execute protocol, Aegis." There was a brief pause. Then the Sentinel commander answered. "Understood." The projection zoomed in as the colossal Terran construct reacted. Docking clamps released across its surface. Hundreds of attached cargo vessels detached simultaneously. Freighters, mining platforms, rescue ships. They accelerated away from Sentinel in tight formation. The beam from the hollow command node struck the defensive shield grid. Reality screamed. The shield did not shatter. It evaporated. Energy barriers collapsed in cascading failure as the beam tore into Sentinel's armored hull. The structure buckled under the impact. Sections of the outer ring disintegrated instantly. But the beam did not destroy the station. Because something else happened, the detached Terran ships returned, not fleeing. Charging Aviental leaned forward in shock. "What are they doing?" Voss whispered the answer. "They're holding the line." The freighters accelerated directly into the beam's path, one by one. Civilian ships placing themselves between the weapon and Sentinel. The first vessel vanished instantly as the beam struck it. Then the second, then the third. Each ship absorbing a fraction of the energy. Each one buying Sentinel a few more milliseconds. Inside the Hall of Concord, the assemblage watched in stunned silence. Thousands of civilian vessels were doing the impossible. They were intercepting the beam. Freighters designed to carry grain, medical ships that had once evacuated refugees, mining barges built to harvest asteroids, all of them sacrificing themselves to weaken the attack. Aviental felt something tighten in his chest. "Those are not warships," he whispered. Voss shook her head slowly. "No, they never were." The beam continued burning through the sacrificial line of ships. Hundreds of Terran vessels disappeared in flashes of molten debris. But with every impact, the beam weakened. Sentinel's reactors surged. Emergency shields reformed across the damaged hull. And then the beam stopped. The hollow command node powered down its weapon. For the first time since the battle began, Project Sentinel still stood. But the price was staggering. Nearly 2,000 Terran ships had been destroyed. The battlefield drifted with wreckage. Inside the Hall of Concord, the silence was profound, because everyone in the chamber understood what they had just witnessed. Humanity had not built a navy. They had built a civilization willing to stand in the way. A new signal appeared on the projection. Dominion fleets. Hundreds of warships emerging from jump space near the battlefield. Sarak's voice echoed across the chamber. "Dominion forces have arrived." Moments later, more fleets appeared. Sereni carriers, Illyrian defense platforms, merchant league cruisers, dozens of civilizations pouring into the fight. The Hollow Fleet reacted immediately. Their harvesters turned to meet the incoming armada. The battle expanded. Now it was no longer humanity alone against the darkness. It was the galaxy. But the hollow command node still remained. and its weapon was recharging. Aviantal stared at the projection. If that fires again, vos nada. Yes. The battlefield was chaotic now. Fleets clashing. Drones swarming. Missile storms lighting the void. But Sentinel was preparing something. The massive construct rotated slowly. Internal power readings climbed higher than before. Much higher. Serac frowned at the telemetry. What are they doing? Aviantal's translator struggled to interpret the energy data. Then it understood and displayed the answer. Stellar reactor overload, the chamber gasped. Voss closed her eyes briefly. They're going to destroy Sentinel. Serac stared at her. You would sacrifice your greatest weapon. Voss opened her eyes. Again. It was never meant to survive. The projection zoomed in. Sentinel's reactors were entering runaway reaction. Energy levels climbed beyond safe containment limits. The entire structure was becoming a bomb, a weapon designed to destroy something much larger than itself. The hollow command node, Aviantal whispered in disbelief. That explosion will vaporize everything nearby. Yes. The fleets included. Yes. Across the battlefield, Terran ships began transmitting evacuation signals. All Allied fleets were ordered to retreat. But the hollow command node did not move. It simply continued charging its weapon. Perhaps it believed Sentinel would collapse before detonation. Perhaps it did not care. Either way, it stayed. Sentinel's commander spoke again over the open channel. His voice was calm. Final reactor sequence initiated. The massive construct accelerated. Straight toward the hollow command node, a suicide run. Aviantal felt his heart's pound. Your people are still on that station. Yes, Voss said softly. The chamber watched as Sentinel closed the distance. Alien weapons hammered its hull. Armor peeled away. Entire sections collapsed under the barrage, but the station continued forward. Closer, closer. The reactor readings spiked into the red. Critical mass approaching. The hollow command node finally reacted. Its weapon fired again. The beam struck Sentinel directly. The Terran structure began to break apart, but it was already too late. The reactors detonated. For a brief moment, a new star was born. The explosion expanded outward in a perfect sphere of white fire. The hollow command node disappeared inside the blast. So did dozens of alien harvesters. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield. When the light faded, the command node was gone. The hollow fleet was breaking apart. Without coordination, the remaining harvesters began retreating into deep space. For the first time in millions of years, the hollows were retreating. Inside the hull of Kankor, no one spoke. The projection showed the battlefield slowly stabilizing. Wreckage drifted where Sentinel had once stood. Thousands of ships, human and alien, remained alive. The galaxy had survived its first encounter with the hollows, but the cost was written in silent debris. Aviantal turned slowly toward Ambassador Voss. Your people saved us. Voss looked at the empty space where Sentinel had been. Her voice was quiet. We bought time. Serac folded his arms. And the hollows will return. Yes. The chamber understood the truth immediately. This had not been the end. It had been the first battle. The speaker rose slowly. The assembly must reconsider many things. He looked toward the Terran delegation. Starting with Article 19. Voss allowed herself a faint smile. Humanity will not ask permission to defend the galaxy. She paused, but we will gladly accept allies. Across the projection, surviving fleets began regrouping. Ships from dozens of civilizations flying side by side. Aviantal felt something new settling over the chamber. Not fear, not rivalry, something older. Unity. Because the galaxy had learned something important that day. Humanity had never wanted to dominate the stars. They had only wanted to make sure someone would still be there. When the darkness arrived again, and far beyond the edge of known space, the remaining hollows drifted through the void. Their sensors studied the aftermath of the battle. A new calculation began. The galaxy they had come to harvest was not defenseless. It was armed and preparing. The next harvest cycle would not be easy.